MJF reportedly leaning towards leaving AEW once his contract expires in 2024. We have an update on his frustration with the company and his relationship with Tony Khan, plus an update on the AEW Dynamite viewership numbers and ratings for this week's episode on TBS, plus a new update on Blood and Guts. Is that match going to be returning soon? All this and more in today's AEW news. Hey guys, welcome back to Wrestling News 365. Hope everyone is doing very well. As always, there are plenty of news stories to get into in the world of All Elite Wrestling. So let's start off talking about MJF, Maxwell Jacob Friedman, and his AEW contract, his frustrations with the company, his contract negotiations. We've heard a million times MJF talk about 2024 and the bidding war that he wants to have happen, I guess, between WWE and AEW. And a lot of people have thought that's very in character. But as I've said several times here on the channel, for me, it's not. Now, does it sound like his character talking? Yes, it does. But I think there's genuine frustration there, and this is backed up with several reports that we've seen over the last few months, particularly an argument he had with Tony Khan over a recent interview that he did with Ariel Helwani, and a new report's come out now saying that he's actually leaning towards leaving the company once his contract does indeed expire in about 2 years' time. Now, MJF reportedly remains frustrated with his AEW contract situation and is leaning towards not re-signing with the company. As noted, this is what I was talking about when it comes to the previous reports, it was reported back in late March, the AEW president, CEO, general manager, head of creative Tony Khan had a heated discussion with MJF, but then had a follow-up conversation that went much smoother than the first. So the assumption was that they were back to being on good terms. Now, this stemmed from Khan being initially upset with MJF's interview with Ariel Helwani, where he discussed interest from WWE, his AEW contract status, and much more. Now, Khan was reportedly concerned about the precedent being set of AEW talents doing interviews without running it past the AEW PR team first, which has been the standard since the company was founded back in 2019. Now, while that was Khan's issue, MJF, on the flip side, was said to be way more frustrated even before the interview actually happened due to his contractual situation with the company. Now, in an update, a new report from Fightful Select, Sean Ross Sapp, notes that things do not appear to be improving between MJF and AEW. While there have not been any signs of outward frustration from Tony Khan's side of things since the heated discussion was settled back in April, with the two sides reportedly talking out their issues, word now is that the sentiment hasn't necessarily lasted on MJF's side. It was noted that MJF's teases at possibly going to WWE when his AEW contract expires are not in character. It's actually a topic that he's already weighed up. There has been at least some progress on MJF's AEW future, with a possible contract extension being discussed. However, many people within AEW do not believe that MJF and Tony Khan are as close as they were prior to the reported discussion about said interview. Now, MJF is now, this is the big headline bit coming out of this, I suppose, MJF is now leaning towards leaving AEW as of now when his AEW contract expires, according to sources in this Fightful report. Now, the contract itself does not expire until 2024, so obviously we're talking about nearly 2 years here, so a lot can change between now and then. Look how much has changed in just pro wrestling in general over the course of the last 2 years, right? So, of course, so much can change between now and then. It was also said that contract negotiations have been mentioned to MJF, but it's not clear if that's a renegotiation of his current deal or an extension or anything like that. With that said, the report notes that MJF is not 100% on leaving AEW. He's not saying like he's decided I'm leaving once my contract's up. He's basically saying at the moment I'm leaning towards leaving, but I'm open to staying as well. Now, when it comes to his contract expiring and his expiration date, his contract expires on January the 1st, 2024, and he has stated that he will be wrestling where the money is. Multiple sources have confirmed that WWE does have an interest in the young star, why wouldn't they, and will likely want to sign him once they're legally able to do so. AEW sources noted back in April that Khan and MJF have maintained a good relationship since AEW launched and have become good friends. While the heated discussion was confirmed by many sources, it was noted that there was no fight or anything like that between Khan and MJF. Not that it ever was going to get physical. I think people just, their minds kind of run away from things. So my opinion on this one is kind of this. It does have echoes, certainly, of the Cody Rhodes situation in Cody Rhodes' contract of or those negotiations whereby he once had a really good relationship with Tony Khan. It's not exactly that they had a bad relationship once Cody Rhodes decided to leave the company or when no negotiations were happening, but they weren't as close as they once were. WWE was an option, and whilst WWE, it's the same with AEW, but whilst WWE will be like, oh, we don't want to contract Tampa, we don't want to get caught talking to someone while they're under contract to another company, it does happen. You have intermediaries, that's why they're called intermediaries. You know, you have people reach out to certain people in the company that give a bit of a wink and a nod. Well, if you let your contract expire, you'll have this offer available, maybe, you know, off the record, or that kind of stuff. So I'm sure that MJF has either spoken to people in WWE or spoken to intermediaries in WWE or whatever it may be. He knows for a fact that WWE wants him, whether it's news on social media or news on websites, or whether it's him actually talking to people within WWE, a friend of a friend of a friend kind of situation. If he talks to Cody Rhodes, him and Cody Rhodes are very good friends. Who's to say that Cody Rhodes hasn't had a discussion with John Laurinaitis, who Cody Rhodes is very good friends with? Or even Vince McMahon. Hey, this MJF guy, he's great, he's money, and he wouldn't mind leaving AEW if the money's there to be made. Where do I think he'll go? I think it's a very difficult one to predict. I really do. I think the situation that's different between him and Cody, when Cody went back to WWE, is Cody had this history. Cody Rhodes has this history in WWE. He was there for however many years it was. His father, the American Dream Dusty Rhodes, is a WWE Hall of Famer. Whilst the majority of Dusty's career wasn't in WWE, he's a well-known name over there, and there was somewhat of a homecoming story to be told there, I suppose. MJF is different. MJF's never been in WWE. He's never even been in developmental or anything like that. Of course, there are videos of MJF out there trying out for Tough Enough and doing the videos and maybe doing some extra work when Samoa Joe shoves him into the wall and all that kind of stuff. But he was never officially under a WWE contract. So that is slightly different. If he were to come in, would they acknowledge the MJF character, and would he be able to be the same and all that kind of stuff? Who knows? It is a slightly different situation, but this is par for the course. This is something that I've been talking about a lot when we've been talking about AEW and contracts. For the first 4 years of AEW's existence, they were signing people, and people were leaving WWE to go to AEW. But eventually, we're going to get to a point where people leave AEW and they go back to WWE. Cody was the first. And I think because it's still a novel concept, people are shocked by this. But if you were a fan of pro wrestling in the 90s, or just prior to WWE basically being the only game in town, this happened all the time. It's life. People don't come to terms on contracts. People have budgets, or people have a higher value, or they have falling outs. Life happens. So could MJF go to WWE? Absolutely he could. Could he sign a contract extension today? He absolutely could. Could he just renegotiate some more money on his contract and it still expire in January 1st, 2024? Absolutely. So I don't expect any of this to stop. We'll hear way more stories about this. We'll see MJF do more interviews. I think Tony Khan was absolutely in the right of his frustration with MJF's interview. Remember, he wasn't frustrated about the subject matter of the interview. He was frustrated of run those interviews past PR, because that's the precedent. If he was in WWE, he'd have to do exactly the same. That's how it works in WWE. You run everything by the various departments. So it's no different there. And I think that was his major concern. So I don't know. Like I said, I don't think that this is going to get resolved anytime soon. It will rumble on, and we'll get get an answer either on January 1st, 2024, or very close to. That's going to be the situation. The interesting thing, of course, is that a lot of people are saying, well, MJF should be the guy to be the AEW World Champion, either the next guy or the guy after that, or something of that nature. Would AEW put the title on a guy who said very openly, yeah, I'll leave. I'm happy to go to WWE. That's a bit different. To put your title on that guy is slightly different. So that's something worth discussing, possibly at a later date. Let's talk about the Dynamite ratings for this week's episode on TBS. Wednesday's live edition of AEW Dynamite drew 840,000 viewers on TBS, according to Nielsen via Showbuzz Daily. Now, this is up. It's basically flat, but it's up 0.84% from last week's episode, which drew 833,000 viewers. This week's Dynamite drew a 0.33 rating in the 18-49 demographic, which is up over 3% from last week's 0.32 rating. Dynamite ranks number 5 on the cable top 150 this week with that 0.33 rating, which is actually down from last week's number 4 ranking. And Dynamite ranks number 36 in viewership for the nights on cable this week, which is even from last week's number 36 ranking. Now, Wednesday's Dynamite drew the second lowest audience of the year so far and the 4th lowest key demo rating of the year so far. It did have strong strong sports competition from the NBA playoffs and the NHL playoffs as well. Again, this would have probably been a situation where if they were still on TNT, they would have been bumped. So you could argue it's a positive that they're still on their time slot, because actually the number would have been way lower because they would have probably been moved to either a really late time slot or a different night. Although sometimes they did get moved to a different night at the same time slot and they did okay. So again, I think this is difficult to judge with AEW because this is the real first stretch in the show's history, in Dynamite's history, where they're in the same slot every single week and they're not going to be moved or preempted or anything like that. But this week's Dynamite viewership was down over 10%, 10.3 rather, to be exact, from the same week in 2021. The key demo rating, though, was up 8% from the previous year. The 2021 episode only faced competition from a regular NBA game, while this year the show had even stronger competition from the NBA playoffs and the NHL playoffs as well. So a lot of people are saying, AEW in the mud, all that kind of stuff. They haven't done over 1 million viewers since the March 23 episode. Is it a concern? Of course it's a concern for AEW. There's no doubt about that. But it must be said that they've had very strong sports competition the last few weeks, and so is every pro wrestling program, frankly, right? Raw or whoever it may be. And all of the numbers are down. It's not a case of, the Raw numbers are way, way, way up and Dynamite's are down. Everyone's pretty much down because it's the part of the year that, some people maybe are not as interested in pro wrestling. But there certainly is an aspect, and I won't hide from this at all. I've criticized AEW for it. There certainly is an aspect of AEW at the moment that it just doesn't feel like it had that momentum that it did a year ago. Specifically around the summertime last year, just so much momentum that company had, whether it was CM Punk rumors, Adam Cole, Bryan Danielson, and not just new acquisitions, the product was really hot as well. Everything they were doing, crowds were just coming back, and they had a really rabid fan base, and it just felt like they were on such a roll. They were really on such a roll, and they were really hitting things, and it felt like they were really going to step up a level or two, and they did somewhat, but they don't have that momentum around this time this year, and I don't know particularly why. People say, it's because Cody left. I don't think it really has anything to do with Cody Rhodes leaving. I just think it's because the shows just don't feel... I think we've seen the Tony Khan formula at this point, and now it's looking for a case of, okay, what now? What next? What can you do differently? And that's the problem. When you've got a program that's been on 52 weeks of the year for 3 years, you start to go, okay, I see the show. I know what you're going to do. You have to constantly reinvent it and do something different. And I don't mean do something different by let's just put a random gimmick main event out there. I enjoyed Darby Allin versus Jeff Hardy, but why it was an Anything Goes match was just bizarre in a tournament. It was. And we've got a feel of what a Tony Khan show is. But once you get that impression, then you go, okay, I know what's going to basically happen this week, so I don't have to watch it if I don't need to. And that's the situation, I think. I think that's the really issues with the AEW Dynamite show right now. But Tony Khan, as always, was trying to put a positive spin on it. He thanked the Dynamite viewers and touted how this was the eighth straight for Wednesday, that Dynamite had ranked in the top 5 shows on cable. He mentioned how many fans felt like this is one of AEW's best shows. Many fans. He said, quote, "Thank you all who watched AEW Dynamite on TBS last night, our 8th straight for Wednesday in the top 5 on cable, and many fans felt it was one of our best shows. We're back on TNT for Rampage tomorrow in that early time slot." Again, I'm not sure where he's getting the metric of fans saying it was one of the best shows ever. I'm not sure. That's just to be on any statistic can be manipulated. That's what statistics do. Statistics sometimes don't necessarily tell the truth. They can actually just enhance your version of the truth. He's trying to put a positive spin on it. Look, it is what it is. It is what it is. I'm not going to go into that much depth. Finally, Blood and Guts. The match should be coming back very soon because AEW is planning on bringing back the Blood and Guts match soon, according to Dave Meltzer on the latest edition of Wrestling Observer Radio. Of course, AEW trademarked Blood and Guts, the name, this past March. Now, Meltzer noted that he wasn't aware of who would be in the match, but with current storytelling, it does look somewhat obvious as to who's going to be in there. It looks like it's going to be the Jericho Appreciation Society. They currently have 5 men in their faction. And of course, on Dynamite this week, they were staring down 7 opponents. The Jericho Appreciation Society was confronted by Eddie Kingston, Santana, and Ortiz, and all 4 members of the Blackpool Combat Club. Therefore, a Blood and Guts match could be happening in that direction, but it's not sure who would actually be on that other side, opposite the Jericho Appreciation Society. Logic would suggest, I would think, if you're going to look at 5, most likely, it's got to be Kingston, Santana, and Ortiz, just because that's the the original rivalry, and the two you would probably have from Blackpool Combat Club is probably Moxley and Danielson, because they're the biggest names. So that's probably what you'd be looking at, I would think. Next week, of course, Jericho and Regal are set to go face-to-face in a promo. Of course, William Regal, he's famous for saying War Games every time on NXT when he was the general manager. So chances are he's going to challenge him for a match and then do the War Games thing, but say blood and guts. That's what he's going to say, or something like that, I think. So whether or not that happens at Double or Nothing, or that happens on an episode of Dynamite, I would probably think it probably happens on an episode of Dynamite, because that setup at Double or Nothing might be somewhat difficult to do, but we'll have to wait and see. Nevertheless, guys, be sure to smash a like on the like button, be sure to subscribe, bottom right-hand corner, and I'll speak for you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.